Good morning, viewers. Today we are going to look into the area of socialization. Let us start by trying to understand what is socialization. Infants are new to any culture. They must be transformed by their parents, teachers and others into cultural and social beings. The general process of acquiring culture is referred to as socialization. So, students, what do you think that happens during socialization? During socialization, we learn the language of the culture we are born into, as well as the roles we are to play in life. For example, girls learn how to be daughters, sisters, friends, wives and mothers. In addition, they learn about the occupational roles that their society has in store for them. Socialization is a learning process that begins shortly after birth. Early childhood is a period of the most intense and the most important stage of socialization. It is then that we acquire language and learn the fundamentals of our culture. It is also a stage when much of our personality takes shape. However, we continued to be socialized throughout our lives. As we grow, our responsibilities vary according to the societal needs. Looking around the world, we see that different cultures use different techniques to socialize our children. There are two broad types of teaching methods, formal and informal. Formal education is what primarily happens in a classroom. It is usually structured, controlled and directed primarily by adult learners who are professional knowers. In contrast, informal education can occur anywhere. It involves imitation of what others do and say, as well as experimentation and repetitive practice of basic skills. 3 stages of socialization. Talcott Parsons saw socialization as a process through which individuals developed and internalized a sense of norms and values. Parsons theorized that there were 3 stages of socialization: primary, secondary and tertiary. The first level of socialization comes at the primary level, where a child is developing personality, characteristics, beliefs and values based on their upbringing. A child will adopt attitudes and beliefs based on their family and their parents. Primary socialization occurs in the family and home. Parents generally have a goal or expectation of the way they want their child to develop. Even seemingly small actions of parents can have major impacts on the socialization of their children. For example, what do you do if your baby cried continuously but was not ill, hungry or in need of any diaper change? Would you hold your baby, rock back and forth, walk around or sing gently until the crying stops, even if it took hours? The answer that you give very likely depends on your culture. The traditional Navajo Indian response usually was to remove the baby from social contact until the crying stopped. After making sure that the baby was not ill or in physical distress, he or she would have been taken outside the small single room house and left in a safe place until the crying stopped. Then the baby would be brought indoors again to join the family. As a result, Navajo babies raised in this way are usually very quiet. They learn early that making noise causes them to be removed from social contact. In most Indian families today, we would hold our baby in this situation until the crying stopped. The lesson that we may be giving is that crying results in social contact. Is this wrong? It may not be wrong, but it is a different socialization technique. The secondary socialization level occurs when an individual is learning about what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. It usually occurs on a very small group level to teenagers and young adults. This level of socialization enables one to become more aware of what the larger society expects from them. The tertiary level of socialization occurs when an individual has integrated into the world and begins to gain new ideas and values of socialization. After one has gone through these stages of development, an individual may go through a re-socialization process, and this happens in different stages of life. For example, people retire or become unemployed, etc. Parsons noted that each stage of socialization had its own way of helping an individual internalize social norms and values. A Parsons concept of socialization is a fusion of personality development and functionalism. Students, shall we see, is it nature or nurture? This debate within the psychology is concerned with the extent to which particular aspects of behavior are a product of either inherited, that is genetic, or acquired, that is learned characteristics. Nature is that which is inherited, genetic. Nurture refers to all environmental influences after conception, that is experience. It has long been known that certain physical characteristics are biologically determined by genetic inheritance. Color of eyes, straight or curly hair, pigmentation of the skin, and certain diseases are all a function of the genes we inherit. These facts have led many to speculate as to whether psychological characteristics such as behavioral tendencies, personality attributes, and mental abilities are also wired in before we are even born. Those who adopt an extreme hereditary position are known as nativists. Their basic assumption is that the characteristic of the human species as a whole are a product of evolution, and that individual difference are due to each person's unique genetic code. At the other end of the spectrum are the environmentalists, also known as empiricists. Their basic assumption is that at birth the human mind is a tabula rasa, that is a blank slate, and that it is gradually filled as a result of experience. Example, behaviorism. From this point of view, psychological characteristics and behavioral differences that emerge through infancy and childhood are the results of learning. It is how you are brought up, nurture, that governs the psychologically significant aspects of child development, and the concept of maturation applies only to the biological aspect. So, when an infant forms an attachment, it is responding to the love and attention it has received. Language comes from imitating the speech of others, and cognitive development depends on the degree of stimulation in the environment and more broadly on the civilization within which the child is reared. In practice, hardly anyone today accepts either of the extreme position. There are simply too many facts on both sides of the argument which are inconsistent with an all or nothing view. So, instead of asking whether the child development is down to nature or nurture, the question has been reformulated as how much. This is to say, given that hereditary and environment both influence the person we become, which is the most important? This question was first framed by Francis Galton in the late 19th century. However, in recent years, there has been a growing realization that the question of how much behavior is due to hereditary and how much to environment may itself be the wrong question. Take intelligence as an example. Like most all types of human behaviors, it is a complex, many-sided phenomenon which reveals itself in a greater variety of ways. The how much question assumes that the variables can all be expressed as a number and that the issue can be resolved in a quantitative manner. The reality is that nature and culture interact in a host of qualitatively different ways. Scientists today have realized that there is no neat and simple way of answering these qualitatively different ways of human behavior. Hence, socialization becomes an important part of the nature-nurture study that is of prime importance to educators. Students, we shall see now socialization in the context of development. Students, in this section, we are going to have a brief look at experts in the field of child development and behavior management. Yuri Braun-Fenbrenner. He believes that the interactions between a child and its family are the main focus of human development. This perspective assumes that the functioning of children and families can be enhanced by strengthening the quality and quantity of relationship. For example, relationship within families, among friends, within neighborhoods, at schools and within communities. Braun-Fenbrenner stressed the importance of interactions among systems. Systems are situations or context within which individuals live their lives. Braun-Fenbrenner believes that systems can positively or negatively influence families and children. For this reason, communities and social institutions need to work to develop connections between the system so that there are more positive influences on the family and individual. Now, let us see what Jean Piaget said. Jean Piaget is a cognitive development theorist. He suggests that individuals are active participants in their own development, constructing knowledge to make sense of their own experience. He believed that all living species have ways of adapting to their environment. Humans are the most adaptable of all. They adapt by using their intelligence, by the active process of gaining understanding of their environment. The peak of development in his model is the capacity for every complex logical reasoning. His model of the development of thinking recognizes the development nature of learning. It implies that we must respect the individual's capacity to make sense of the world in his or her own way. It includes recognizing the importance of allowing children to discover for them important logical knowledge related to their particular stage of development. Piaget's theory had 4 stages. They are sensory motor stage, pre-operational stage, concrete operational stage, formal operational stage. Erik Erikson is a psychoanalytical theorist. His theory suggests that we develop through a predetermined unfolding of our personalities in 8 stages. In each stage, a central problem is posed, where a struggle is fought between positives or negatives. Example, basic trust versus basic mistrust. Our progress through each stage is partly determined by our success or otherwise in the previous stages. Emrc proposed that the effects of these conflicts continue through later stages of development, although he does not believe that traumatic experiences occurring in childhood necessarily lead to trouble. Good experience in later stages can make up for bad ones at an earlier stage. Emrc's theory has 8 stages: basic trust versus basic mistrust, autonomy versus shame, initiative versus guilt, industry versus inferiority, ego identity versus role confusion, intimacy versus isolation, generatively versus stagnation, ego integrity versus despair. Emrc's theory implies that there is a heavy responsibility on parents and teachers to ensure that the child does not become maladjusted, for example, by not being overprotective or allowing them too much freedom. Acculturation in the context of development and socialization. Students, we are living today in a globalized world where children and adults face many new influences that were not part of life of earlier generations. This process of learning new behaviors that come from other cultures is called acculturation. If we think of development as a systematic and organized process involving changes that is successive in character and takes place throughout one's life, we see that acculturation is also a similar process in today's society for people all over the world. Thus, change in one issue common to both acculturation and development. Developmental stages serve to make an individual more adaptive into his or her ecosystem. Both acculturation and development serve the function of adaptation. Acculturation studies tend to state individual changes either as a coping mechanism brought about by an encounter with an unfamiliar cultural context, or as a need on the part of an individual to learn specific cultural skills so as to thrive and survive in a given cultural context. Acculturation, therefore, basically entails learning to deal with a new cultural situation. Developmental studies, on another hand, normally conceptualize individual changes as arising from either one or two processes, namely biological and maturational process and environmental learning. As can be seen, while acculturation is basically conceived of as a learning phenomenon, development entails both learning and maturation. However, biology and maturation are also central to acculturation. In the absence of acculturation, all individuals undergo development involving biological and maturational changes and the learning of behaviors that are culturally sanctioned through the interactions that take place in the social environment. This later form of development is termed enculturation and socialization. Human development is personally constructed within a specific social context. Different people, social and ideological institutions may guide and give direction to the development, but they cannot determine exactly how the individual deals with and internalize its experiences. In this sense, we may say that each human represents an individual culture that is expressed through his behavior. One issue where we claim present theories have not sufficiently attended to is the failure to distinguish between developmental and acculturation changes. Throughout the lifespan, acculturation and development process invariably occur simultaneously and in close interaction with each other, making it difficult to identify their independent roles. This problem is compounded by the fact that cross-cultural psychologists, while concerned with acculturation, fail to bring developmental issues into their framework. At the same time, mainstream psychologists concerned with development fail to bring acculturation into their theories. Failure to attend to these issues may limit our theorizing of the adaptation of children and adolescents to the changing needs of a global society. Shall we see larger social issues? Yes, students, homeschooling, that is children being taught at home by parents, is a big movement in Western countries and is a movement fast becoming more and more popular in India. Let us look at some issues of socialization that are raised by people who advocate homeschooling as ideal for children. To an educationalist, the term socialization can mean either the process of teaching a child those rules and customs which govern the way a society works, or it can mean a child's access to peer contact. These two issues are linked since it is believed that children learn customs and rules by social contact. The issue of socialization is most often stated as a concern that if children are removed from school and educated in the home, they will miss out on the necessary socialization skills gained at school. Students, let us now examine some of these arguments. Initially, it is assumed that the school is in some sense a model for the real adult world of work and recreation. In reality, schools are an almost unique institution in society. Nowhere else do you find a homogeneous group of individuals of the exact same age grouped together to complete the same task, each often working in isolation to others in the group, with one person, the only one of a different age present, in control of the process. It is also wrongly believed that children need many others of the same age around them. This raises the question why? Why should it be wise to remove children from society, place them in an environment with a little input from adults and call it socialization? It seems to me that many of the problems, stresses and anxieties that particularly teenage children suffer from stem from the lack of social contact they have with other members of society who have already gone through the many transition and transformation that they are experiencing. The lack of input from adults in the lives of schooled teenage children is as shocking as it is unnatural. Many people who believe in homeschooling believe that the school gives our young people a distorted view of life. It removes children from the reality of the society and places them in the hands mostly of other children. Those few adults they do encounter to become authoritative sources of knowledge and reduce all children into passive receivers of whatever the adult choose to pass on. This is seen by some as not natural or real. In no other setting are people organized so strictly by age and ability, not to mention gender, race, neighborhood, etc. They are presented with the facts that they are required to learn, which may or may not be of any interest or utility, and then they are periodically tested for their take-up of said facts. The social skills learned in such a place are of little use to them in other settings. Most home educated children spend a considerable amount of time using the resources they find in their community. This more open approach provides home educated children with the interpersonal skills necessary for them to make the most of such encounters, thus acquiring skills more closely related to those they will need as adults. Conclusion. Students, in conclusion, let us examine the question, why is socialization important to educators? Socialization is important because we are social animals. If a person cannot interact and socialize with those around him or her, life will be extremely difficult. Not knowing the rules of behavior for one's society and culture can create a lot of problems. For example, in our culture, smiling is a sign of friendliness and is considered polite, but in other cultures, smiling at someone might be considered rude or a sign of weakness. The socialization process of modern schooling is often cited as the most important gain of students from the schooling process. We have seen above some of the arguments for and against this process. With important scientific developments that are being made to substantiate the nature-nurture debate, especially in the area of genetics, many of the assumptions of modern education, like that tabula rasa concept or the mind of a child is a blank slate concept, are being challenged by modern science. Educators need to know about these developments in order to make sure that future educational models are developed in line with developments of modern science and in the interest of the child and society. For one reason or another, some children do not develop social skill as easily as others. This is a fact that is observed by all teachers and similar to the fact that not all children learn as easily as some children. Thus, learning about socialization is important for teachers in order to be able to support their students in acquiring the right socialization, where they will be able to maximize their talents and potentials and become assets to their family, community and society at large. Thank you.